third year 4-H and my second year beekeeping. As my beekeeping mentor told me early on, it's good to read books and articles about bees, but the real learning comes when you put it into practice. So while my main written source is Increase Essentials by Dr. Lawrence John Connor, today I'd like to share with you what I've learned by putting it into practice and doing this all in my apiary bee yard. So this talk is adapted to being put on at field days and outside, so I don't have a PowerPoint. I'll be passing a few photos and objects around in case you want to get a closer look at them. So today in my presentation, Increased Colonies, I'm going to talk about why increased colonies, the different kinds of increased colonies, which include swarms, package bees, and splits, and then some advantages and disadvantages of each. So first, well, why increased colonies? The reasons I've chosen increased colonies are because to replace winter losses. I had 3 colonies going into last winter, and I lost one, so I had 2 at the beginning, so I got some increased colonies to replace my winter losses. And then, since I had 2 colonies left, I wanted to get to a goal of 8 to 10 colonies, so I got some increased colonies to expand the size of my bee yard. And then you can bring in new genetics. If you get the same breed of bees from the same beekeeper over and over, the bees will start to get inbred, and then that'll increase honey and brood production. And then also you can test out some different breeds like Russians or hygienic behaving bees. And then you can keep spare queens in small nucleus boxes like these that have 5 frames. And you can still evaluate their brood pattern, how they forage, what their worker's temperament is like. So it's a good reason to have some increased colonies. So today I'm going to start with swarms because that's how bees naturally reproduce, and that's how beekeepers have been making increased colonies for hundreds of years. So you might be wondering, well, what is a swarm? A swarm is when a queen leaves with about 50 to 60% of workers, and they fly off to find a new home. You can look at the photo more closely now. So there's some different ways you can catch swarms. You can go on site to catch them, or you can set a swarm trap. First I'll be talking about how I go on site and catch them. So, some very important tools that you need when you go on site is a sheet that you want to lay on the ground and have as wide an area as possible. And then you want to set your box on there and try to shake the bees or brush them into that box. But if they land on the sheet, that's okay. They won't land in the wet ground. If you do it early in the morning like I did, and I forgot the sheet, so we had to wait for a few hours for them to dry off. So it took forever. And also you want to take your bee brush. So when you can't cut the limbs, or you can't shake it because it's too wide of a tree, you can use a spray bottle and brush them down off with a bee brush like this one. This is when they landed on a fence post, and I had to use that method. So when you set a swarm trap, you have to have a kind of lure, and there's a few different ways you can do that. You can buy a fancy bee pheromone lure from a beekeeping supply company that comes in small capsules like this, which you can break or soak in cloths to get out the scent. You can have a closer look at those too. Or there's another method, is when you have old, very dark brood combs like this that's had quite a few cycles of brood and honey and pollen stored inside, the bees will be attracted to the scent of this wax. So, you want to have a swarm trap about 10 to 15 feet up in the air, secured with bungee cords or wires. Boxes like these can work. So now some of the advantages and disadvantages of swarms. The advantages are that swarms are virtually free. You don't have to pay to catch a swarm. If you catch them, you keep them. They're yours. And then you have a chance of catching feral survivor bees, which just live in the wild and cannot be Africanized because our climate's too cold. And if they can make it through the winter without a beekeeper like myself feeding them and treating them for mites, which are a big problem in in the bee world, then it's very good genetics. And then swarms are ready to draw comb. When you catch a swarm, they left the hive and they gorge themselves on honey, so their honey stomachs are full, and when that honey is digested, then that turns into wax, so it's ready to draw out to different combs that you have. And then the disadvantages of swarms. The disadvantages of swarms include that there's much uncertainty. There's an uncertain quantity. Say you lost 5 colonies over winter and you want to replace them with swarms. Then you might not catch any swarms, or you might catch 20. You just don't know how many swarms you'll be able to catch. And then there's uncertain quality and genetics. The bees might be very prone to swarming, just another beekeeper stock that they're just genetically prone to swarming. Like I caught a hive that had covered about 3 frames like these on both sides, and then they made all of these queen cells, which is when the new queen would have hatched out. You can pass on down. When the new queen hatches out, the old queen will leave with a lot of the workers, and I'll lose my workforce. So that's very bad. And also on that comb, it's got very poor comb building. On the foundation, which you can see is the flat plastic foundation, they build up all that wax off so the workers can go under the comb as tunnels, and they can run and hide, and I can't see what's going on. So then there's package bees. There's one reason that package bees have their name, and that's because they come in a package. In this package, I got about 3 pounds of bees, a queen cage suspended by a wire by this large sugar syrup can for the bees to eat on during transit. You can pass this around too. So, the advantages of package bees are that they have a possibility of earlier delivery. You can get a package through the mail sooner than swarms will fly, or new queens can be mated. And then you can start from scratch with package bees if you don't have the smarts or knowledge to catch a swarm, and you don't have another colony to make a split from, like I'll talk about in a minute. And then you can select your preferred genetics. You can select hygienic bees or Russians, and they'll be more closely related. If you have some different breeds, I'll talk about that more in a minute, but queens might be unaccepted. So the disadvantages of package bees is that they're extremely expensive. They cost about $100 to $140 plus shipping. So they're very, very expensive. And then you have to feed package bees because they only have the small sugar syrup cans to sustain them, and their honey, and they won't draw wax, and their honey cells are virtually empty. And then there's unbalanced age of worker bees. The worker bees that you get in a package, they'll be the older forager bees, and when they arrive, they'll have to be pushed back to younger bees' jobs for about 3 to 4 weeks. There'll be a steady decrease in population until the brood production picks up again. You can solve this with a frame or 2 of brood if you have another colony. So now I'm going to talk about splits. There's 2 different kinds of splits that I'm going to talk about today. There is a split with a queen purchase, or there's a split with a queen you raise yourself. But how you make them is just the same. So how you make a split is you take 1 to 2 frames of drawn comb like this, so that the bees don't have to use some stores and others you give them to draw out comb. And then you give them 1 to 2 frames of stores of honey and pollen, so that they have food and they can start collecting nectar sooner, just to help them build up. And then you want to give them a few frames, 1 or 2 frames of brood, which is baby bees, and that just helps keep their ages, balanced ages of worker bees, unlike packer bees. If you want to look in this frame, there's a few cells of very bright goldenrod pollen, and then some stores and brood, so you can see all in one frame. So first I'm going to talk about a split with a purchase queen and some of the advantages of them. When you buy a queen, it's at a lesser cost to you than buying a package. Queens cost about $20 to $25 plus shipping, but you still get new genetics in the queen when they lay eggs. Those workers and drones, they'll be of the same breed as the queen. So you get new genetics at a lesser cost. And then giving the splits all that honey and pollen and brood, that just makes them faster growing, so there's a higher possibility of honey crop in your first year. And then when you split, you reduce the crowding and the swarming impulse. Like this hive is extremely crowded, so if I didn't make a split out of here soon, I might lose all my workforce and not get a honey crop. We can have a closer look at that. So the disadvantages of a purchase queen split is that the queen might be unaccepted. When you have Italian workers and let's say a Russian queen, the workers would be more likely to accept a queen of their own breed than the foreign kind. And then the queen might be Africanized from the southern region of the United States, and that's just makes them genetically meaner and more prone to swarming than the other European breeds that we have. And then there's a hassle of finding the queen in the parent colony. If you move the queen from the parent colony to the split, then the parent colony will be queenless and the split, if you introduce a new queen, those queens will fight to the death and you'll be down a queen either way. Okay, now I'm going to talk about a split with a queen you raise yourself. So the advantages is that you don't have to pay to raise a queen out of your own stock, so you don't have to, there's no cash outlay, and then you know the ancestry, you know if that the mother of this queen, if she made it through the winter or not, if she made a honey crop, how well temperamented her workers are. And then you can select the maternal genetics if you raise your own queen. You can make queens out of your good hive that has very nice evenly drawn combs and all this other nice genetics. And you can just have all that in the daughter queen. If you raise it, you can select the maternal genetics. So the disadvantages are that when you raise a queen in our climate, there's a much later beginning because it has to be warm enough for the queen to go on a mating flight. And then when they do go on a mating flight, you cannot control mating. Some other big producers, they can flood a place with drones of their selected genetics. But since I'm such a small producer, I cannot do that, so I cannot control the mating. So, in conclusion, we've talked about increased colonies, the swarms, which you have the thrill of the chase, and you might catch feral survivor bees, package bees, where you can start from scratch and have new genetics of your preferred stock. And with splits, my preferred favorite that are faster growing and that I found they just have a higher rate of doing well in my hives. So, thank you for your time, and I hope I've sparked your interest in honeybees and beekeeping, and I hope you'll find out more about the importance of honeybees. So again, thank you, and are there any questions? Yes, young lady.
You said about some different breeds of bees. What breeds of bees do you have?
The question was, you said about some different breeds of bees, and what breeds do I have? Well, I have Minnesota hygienics, which are my preferred favorite. They're adapted to our climate and they're hygienic. And then I have some Italian Colonies crosses, which aren't my favorite. And then some BSH, or Varroa sensitive hygienics, which have their hygienic behavior, but they are supposed to be especially sensitive of Varroa mites. Yes?
How do you raise your own queen for a split?
Well, the question was, how do you raise your own queen for a split? Well, if you have swarm cells, like the frame I passed out, you have those, you can make a split with those, and those will be queens again. And then, or you can try a notching method, where you find very young bees, very young eggs and larvae, and you notch the comb with with some different tools, like this one. You notch it, and then they'll build a clean cell around that notched area. Any other questions? Yes?
How did you get started doing this?
The question was, how did I get started doing this? Well, the answer is, my father and I took a bee class 2 or 3 years ago, and I just got very interested in the importance of pollination and the genetic factor of how important that is in beekeeping. So I found it very interesting, and I got into a Mentor Kids program with the Southeast Iowa honey producers, which I'm the honey princess of. So, any other questions? Yes? Larva, the question was, all those little caps on the brood frame, what do they have larvae underneath them? The answer is yes. That is all cat brood. It might be larva or pupa. I don't know exactly the stage it's at, but it's turning from larva to pupa in the cells. The question was, I think they're all still alive, or if they got damaged? And the answer is no, they're actually starting to emerge now, so they're coming out and breaking their cappings. The question was, when the little bees come out, what do they do? Well, after they come out, their first job is they clean their cell so the queen can lay in it again. And if they don't do a nice enough job, they have them redo that. And then they go and they find some food, or else they'll die. Yes, sir, and back.
On your brood frame you passed around, why are some of the white larvae sticking out of the why are they on the caps?
The question was, why are some of the white larvae on the brood frame sticking out? And the answer is, I'm betting it's the heat and having them moved around in the car that just pop out since the cappings aren't there. Yes, sir?
When you talk about hygienic bees, what do you mean by that?
The question was, when I say hygienic bees, what do I mean by that? And the answer is, when I say hygienic bees, that means that they will sense when the brood larva is dead, and they'll clean it out, and they'll throw it out of the hive. So then that is a defense against varroa mites and other diseases that honeybees have. Yes. The question was, how do you treat for the mites? And there's quite a few different methods. There's a bunch of miticides and other chemicals, which I do not like. And my defenses against them is a screened bottom board, and then I coat the bees in powdered sugar, and then when they clean themselves, the mites fall off and fall through the screened bottom board. Any other questions?
How long does it take to get a crop of honey from one hive?
The question was, how long does it take to get a crop of honey from a hive? Well, this is my second year, and last year I didn't get a honey crop. They just weren't strong enough. I got a few packages and a small nuke from another breeder. But this year, you put on some supers with foundation, and they'll draw that out and store honey. And it depends on which colony you have it on, because some of my colonies are faster at drawing out comb than some of my others. So it depends on the genetics and the behavior of the bees. Yes, sir.
What are some of the good plants that bees collect nectar from, and was this a good year or a bad year for honey?
The question was, what are some of the plants that bees collect from, and whether this was a good or a bad year? And the answer is that usually most of the honey you see in stores is clover honey, but this year we had a lot of wildflower, and it wasn't a very good year because of the drought. We didn't have very much nectar production in the flowers, so we didn't get as big a crop as we would have liked. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I was down in Mount what causes the
start a new hive somewhere else. Are there any other questions? The question was, if the swarm is very small, what should you do with it if it's going to make anything? Well, later in the season it is, the worse conditions it is to catch swarms. You want to catch them in early spring, or else they won't have enough time to build up. And that might have been an after swarm. When they swarm out once and more queens hatch, she might leave again in an after swarm.
Can you artificially feed them? How much support them, or do they have to make their own stuff?
The question was, can you artificially support them and give them stores over the winter? And the answer is yes. You can feed them sugar syrup. 1:1 is the thinnest you can have it, but it can be 2:2. And then they will take that syrup and they'll take it down, hide, and store it in frames. Or when there's not a honey flow going on and I want bees to draw out comb, I give them a feeder and some foundation, and then I let them draw that out. Any other questions? If not, that concludes my presentation.